So scale that up a little bit, maybe move it forward. Working on a new layer. Let's start painting that in a bit. Now, as I start painting, the texture goes away. That's so I can see the model underneath. As soon as I let go of the mouse key or the Wacom tablet, if I'm using my stylus, it pops back into view. You can adjust the opacity on this, so it's more opaque or less opaque depending on your preference. So if I go around the outside edge like this, okay, and just paint into the middle. Something like that. Come through here like this. Around here. I'm actually going to, well, so I might do a bit more up here. A bit like that. Maybe a bit through here like that. Just going to bake that down by hitting the Alt key. Now I'm going to rotate this texture around. Paint a bit in through here. So I might move that out a bit like that. Paint into the center. Maybe a bit like that. Just up here through the top. Maybe like that. Just going to bake that down and move that out of the way for a minute. No, not darken. And what's green? Screen might be better, not quite as intense. I'll just pull that back a little bit, maybe something like that. Okay, I'm just going to save that. I've just made a copy of the layer. So I want to go to maybe a darken. Pull that back up so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to throw in an adjustment layer on top of this. Do an invert. Okay, what's a multiply? I think a multiply is better. Now that's lying directly on top of the texture underneath, so we can't really see it. So, so what I might do, add that. Just pull it back a bit. Actually, let me just switch that off for a moment. Lighten it up. I think the darker texture looks better than the lighter one, so I think we might stick with the darker one, make it look a bit more dirty. Save that. Now I'm going to right click, export flattened, export everything flattened. We're in our stairs folder. It's Upper Terrace Tiles Painted TGA. I'm just going to double check that that is the actual texture map that we're using. It's this one here. Upper Terrace Tiles Painted.tga, that's the one, so that should be good. Okay, export all patches. So before we do that, I know I did some color correction in 3D Studio Max, in Adobe Photoshop rather. So what I'm going to do is go export flattened, export everything flattened again. And instead of calling it the same thing, I'm just going to make it _2, so it's its own separate texture map. Alright. Now I'm just going to quickly load up Photoshop. Make sure I can see my chat window here. Pop you over there for a minute. Okay, now I'm going to open Upper Terrace Tiles Painted 2. I want both of these. Okay. That's the one that's on there at the moment. That's the one that we've just painted. So I'm going to go Control A, Control C to copy that layer. I'm going to paste it into this one. And I'm just going to start playing with the blending modes in Photoshop a little bit. Okay, let's save this out as Terrace Tiles Painted 2, this Photoshop file, and I'm also going to save it out as a Target file on .tga. In our stairs folder, save. 24-bit is fine, we're not using any alpha information. Alright, we'll just move that back down like that. Now we'll go and do 3D Studio Max into the material editor, and we're going to swap out that target for the one here that we just saved out in Photoshop. Okay, close that. You see we have a darker texture running just around the outside here. Here. A little bit of our interior texture up here and here around the outside edge. Now I know when I was looking at this last week that I feel that the tiles here are a bit too green, so I'm just going to do a bit of color correction on that in Photoshop. So I'm going to Control A and copy both the layers into its own new layer. And I'm going to put an adjustment of hue and saturation on this. Just pulling back on the saturation a bit to make it a little bit more white and less green. That's the corrected, that's the original. Subtle but noticeable. What I'm also going to do is take the eraser brush with a very large brush size and a very soft edge. I'm just going to erase some of that white and bring back in a bit more of that yellow, just to give it a bit more variation. Just here and there, wherever you feel inspired to use. So that's the original, that's it brought back a little bit more. Let's see what that looks like in Max. Just going to save that. And also save it as a target. Yes, we want to overwrite the original. We have our PSD file here if we ever want to change it back, so it's not a problem overwriting the original file. Let's go back into Max. And again, I still feel it's a bit yellow, so back into Photoshop. Just going to pull out a bit more saturation. Might even look at the levels on this a bit. Maybe pull it up. Let's see what that looks like. Again, save over the TGA file. Yes. 24-bit. Okay, it's a bit better. Just not quite so yellow. That you have some of the white part of the tile showing up, which just makes it look a little bit more natural. And I want it to look dirty because it's an object that sits outside, so it's going to get a lot of weathering, but I don't want it to look too yellow all over. I don't want the entire model to start looking too yellow. And again, in the lighting in 3D Studio Max here, this flat default shading is not going to show you exactly what the model will look like once it's rendered out, but it gives you a good idea of color. All right. I have to look at what's going on with the texture and the tiles at the bottom. I don't know why. It looks like the texture map is kind of a bit funky. Let's just have a quick look at that. Back into the channel info. Okay, there we go. It was just the UV channels that we used weren't copied across properly from UV channel 2, which is the one we did the render to texture on, back into UV channel 1, which is the one that Max is showing in the viewport here. If that ever happens again, just go into the Modify tab into channel info and just copy across the UVs from channel 2 into channel 1. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, if you didn't watch last week's streams, I'll be doing the same thing today with the outside edge, so you can see what I mean exactly when I start working on that piece. Anyway, let's go back. Just need to check that that is using the correct texture. If you ever want to have a better view of your texture in 3D Studio Max than this little square, you can just view the image here. That is the one. Again, I'm just going to make sure that that is assigned. And it is. That's good. Alright. I don't think it was assigned correctly before. It is now. Max had a bit of a hiccup there. So I'm just going to save this file out quickly. I think we might do a bit of work on that that edge there, that shelf that runs around the outside of the, or that border that runs around the outside of the interior of the rotunda here. And I may also do a bit of dirty up the interior of the texture here as well. But we'll work on this outside blue ring first. Again, when I'm modeling anything, from when I start a model, I work with shapes in Max and basic standard colors like the pink, the grey, the yellow, this really pale green, so that I can visually easily see that I haven't textured those parts of the model yet. You could make it all white and work that way, but I prefer to work in colors like this and using a separate color for a separate type of object. So all of the posts here are green, all of the banisters are pink, stairs are yellow, etc. So it gives me a quick indication of what I still need to texture up, what I haven't done yet. Just personal preference for me. Let's select that ring and go into the material editor quickly. So what I do again is I throw a standard texture map on the object just to give it a base color, and then I take it and paint over the top of it to give it more interest. So I'm just looking for a very plain texture at the moment. Maybe this one here. All right. Let's do a okay, let's convert it to an editable poly. It's always better to work in edit poly mode. I was wondering why it wouldn't let me put a UVW map on it. It's because it was a Boolean operation. So always convert it down either to an editable mesh or editable poly. Preferably editable poly. It's better to work with a poly than a mesh. You have more options in Max here if you're working with a poly. Okay, let's throw a UVW map on that. And we want cylindrical. We do want to cap it. Pull it up a bit. Let's try four tiles on that. And let's try 2 on that. Now, even though this is a cylindrical object, I'm going to put a box map on it. Now, you might think, well, that's a bit weird. Why are you putting a box map on it on a cylindrical object? I've noticed that with this particular model, even though there is a line here because it's in box mapping mode and it's really a cylinder, that's going to be completely covered over when we paint on top of it. And it's throwing a bit of texture here on the edge than it is with cylindrical mapping. If I switch it back, you can see what it's doing here. Now we could try fixing that by tiling. Again, that'll work. We'll leave it as cylindrical here just for the sake of ease of people to get their head around. You could use a box map though, and then paint over any line that you see, but we'll leave it as cylindrical for the moment. Because again, we're going to be painting over the top of this anyway, so let's work on that. So we've got a base texture color on that outside ledge. So what we're going to do now is we're going to UV unwrap. We're going to change the mapping channel to channel 2 down here. We'll move the UVs across. We'll open the UV editor. Select all of the UVs. Go to mapping, flatten mapping. You can leave everything on default here. Just click OK. And that's just flatten map the UVs into the 0 to 1 UV space for us. Alright. I'm just going to turn off map seams. I don't like the way it covers up the model. Now we're going to go to render, render to texture. I'll press the 0 key on your keyboard. We're going to use existing channel, which is channel 2. We'll add a diffuse map. I'm going to make it 2048 by 2048. Again, I like to go larger than you may need because that way you can reduce it in Photoshop. Whereas if you go smaller than you need, it's very hard then to make it larger without causing problems. So we'll call this, what do we call this? We'll call it center ledge, I think. I'm going to save it as a TGA file. 24-bit again is fine. Alright, so we have our map channel set up. We have diffuse map. We have our path and a texture size. So we'll just hit render. Let's close that down. Close down the render to texture. I'm just going to call that object what we called the texture map, which is center ledge. Now I'm going to export selected into our stairs folder. We're going to export it as an OBJ. Again, we're going to call it center ledge. Export. Okay. I'm just going to save the max file quickly. Alright, now we're going to go into Mari. Again, I'm just going to make sure that that file is saved. We get File, New. I may come back to this texture in just a little while. I just want to do a bit more work on these corner edges here. And we're going to call it Center Ledge. We're going to select the OBJ file we just exported from 3D Studio Max. From that stairs folder. That's that one there. We're going to create a texture map which is 2048, which is what we saved it out from in Max, that size. Let's go OK. Now it's complaining that UVs are out of range, and that is because we forgot to copy the UVs from channel 2 into channel 1. So we'll just let Mari do its thing here for a minute. And we'll close that project. So if you ever see that error message in Mari, it's just saying, well, the UVs that you want me to work with are not within the 0 to 1 range, and I can't do it. So I'm just going to delete that project we just created. And I'll show you now how to fix that. So we have our object selected, that center ledge. We're going to go into the modify panel, channel info. We have two map channels here. We want to copy map channel 2 into map channel 1. And I'm just going to clear channel 2. Now we just want to put that new render to texture that we just made in Max on that object. So we're just going to create a standard texture map, drag in a bitmap, go to our stairs folder, centerledge.tga was the texture map. We're going to pipe that into the diffuse channel. We will show shaded map in viewport and show realistic. I just like to get into the habit of doing that. That way if I ever change anything here, I can easily, it's already set up, so I won't have a problem viewing the model, the texture, if I want to change the shading mode in Max. So now that that's copied across, we just assign the material to the model. Now we just re-export it again, export selected. Centerledge.obj. Yes, we want to replace it. Okay. Now when we go into Mari, we go new project. Again, we're going to call it Center Ledge. We're going to load up that OBJ file we just re-exported from Max. We're going to create a texture color map at 2048. Go OK. And now Mari can complain because our UVs are within the 0 to 1 UV space. So, but our texture isn't there. So just go into the channels color, and we want to import into layer stack. Into our stairs folder. It defaults to TIFF file, so just pop a star in the template and it'll show all your textures that are in that folder. And we want the centerledge.tga file, import all patches. And our texture is showing up. Okay. I'm just going to turn on flat shading up here. So I'm not, I don't have shadows that are getting in the way of what I'm doing, so I can see what I'm doing. Now, normally with objects like this, you would go into the, where are we? Into the project tab and turn on edge masking. And what that will do is it throws on this shading, which means if I'm painting on this outside edge here, the texture won't transfer to the top and won't stretch. And that's normally the way you'd work for 90% of the models, but because this is such a narrow piece, I don't actually want to work that way, so I want to turn masking off so I can paint on both sides at the same time. It'll just make it much quicker to get the model painted up and easier in the long run. So, but it really just depends on the model that you're working with. So I'm just going to bring in some texture maps. Oh, I don't want that one. I'm just holding the Shift key and selecting them all. And open. You see them popping in here. Remember, if there's anything you're not sure of about what I'm doing or you'd like some clarification on, feel free to pop into the chat and let me know, and I'll answer you as best I can. Okay, I'm just going to bring in another set of textures as well. The dirt ones. Select all of those. And open. Now that edge, I think what I want for that edge is less grey and more. So red might look quite good. Let's see. Because it's sitting next to a very detailed and colourful central mosaic, tiled mosaic, a bit of colour in it probably would look quite okay. Anyway, let's start with a new layer. And let's see what you look like. Let's scale it down a little bit. Maybe not that much. I'm going to start painting this in. You see I'm going over the side as well as the top. I'll bake that down. You can see there's no stretching happening because of the angle. If I was on an angle like this and tried to paint, then you'll get texture stretching happening across the top because it's too narrow of an angle. So just angle the model up a bit more like that, so you can see both sides, and you shouldn't have a problem with texture stretching. And if you do, then you can quite easily fix it up by painting over it. So let's just move that down a bit, rotate it a little bit. I'll back that down. Now we'll do the same thing here. Back it down. Rotate it around a bit. Now, even though I'm completely covering the texture underneath of it, what I'll do is once I've painted this layer in, I'll play with the blending modes up here and see if we can get it to blend in. And if we can't, that's not a problem, but yeah, we'll see how we go. Let's continue painting this down. And painting this on like this, we're fixing this problem where we have this edge here, this harsh edge where you can see the texture is not flowing around the model. But I always like just to have an underlying color on a model so that it's easier for me to see what I'm working with. Paint that down. Let's rotate that around a bit. Paint that down. Rotate you around. I'm rotating the model just by holding down the Alt key and then clicking with the left mouse button. Paint that in. Rotate it around, angle it just right. Now, I don't like that, so I'm going to move that down and also rotate the texture a bit. So